Hi everyone. If you're anything like me, you've spent a substantial portion of the last week watching Stranger Things and Thor Ragnarok. What I got from watching both of those was the synth score. It inspired me to write a synth piece of my own. Here we go. So I'm going to title this video Synth Wave, aka Retro Electro. And when I think of synth, I often think of movies. And this is my brief, incomprehensive, possibly inaccurate history of synth scores, and it's sourced from my own memory, so don't get too down on me because I'm just making this stuff up as I go along. But when I think of synth scores in movies, the first thing I can think of is Clockwork Orange, the Stanley Kubrick film, where the score was done by Wendy Walter Carlos. Most of the cues were classical music pieces that had been arranged for the Moog synthesizer. Moog, 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 Moog. I don't know. Thinking back to the fact that those synthesizers were monophonic and that all that arrangement and sequencing was done, it sort of is mind-boggling how much work went into Switched on Bach, the Clockwork Orange score, that type of thing. Moving on from Wendy Walter Carlos, we get Vangelis in the Blade Runner score. Blade Runner, of course, is also in the news because there's a reboot of that, and the Vangelis score for the original movie is awesome. And then moving on from there, we have John Carpenter, and John Carpenter deserves unique distinction because in addition to directing his own movies, he also wrote the score. How badass is that? It's not good enough just to be the director, you're also penning the score and writing it out on the synth? That is dope AF. Here is where things started to break down because synth scores were easier than hiring out an orchestra, doing all the full orchestrations. They got a reputation for being cheaper, sounding cheaper, not being as extravagant as the full orchestral score. And yet, if you're trying to tell a story, the synth score can have its place. And that brings us to the modern day. I think of my favorite synth score artist these days, Cliff Martinez. Cliff Martinez's score for The Neon Demon is probably one of my favorite scores in recent memories, and it was a synth score. Now, moving on, we have Stranger Things, the music done by Michael Stein and Kyle Dixon of that band Survive. And then, of course, we have Thor Ragnarok, the score was done by Mark Mothersbaugh of Devo. And out of all the crazy crap on my walls in the studio, I think the bumper sticker that says honk if you're Devo is one of the coolest. Now, there's a channel on YouTube called Spitfire Audio, and they make sample libraries, but they have a series called Composer Cribs or Creative Cribs, and they go to these famous composers' houses, and almost all of them are synthesizer nuts. And I never really understood why. You see, I came from the guitar, bass, drum set, singer, rock and roll world of music, and that was my introduction. When I got into production, I favored sample libraries over synthesizers just because I could wrap my head around sample libraries a little better. It's like, oh, I want 3 oboes in this piece. Boom, dial up an oboe patch. I want some flautando solo violin samples, you got it. But with the synthesizer, it's a little bit more work to develop the sounds, but I think that I also didn't realize the power of the synthesizer. In the piece that you're about to hear, I use Cubase's Retrologue synthesizer for every single track. The drums, Retrologue. The chords, Retrologue. The arpeggiators, Retrologue. The lead lines, Retrologue. The bass, Retrologue. It was all done with a single synthesizer, and I think that's what composers are so jazzed about. 30, 40 years in the past, to be able to make all those sounds from one instrument must have been amazing because sample libraries didn't exist back then. And to be able to synthesize a drum set, a guitar, whatever you wanted out of a single synthesizer must have been a godsend. I used Retrologue instead of something like Reactor, which is a little bit more advanced and there's more options, because I wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to learn more about synthesis and see if I could put it all together in a single project. And that's my pro tip for the week. Challenge yourself. Give yourself projects in music, because I think you'll find when you come out the other side, even if what you made isn't your all-time greatest piece, you're going to have learned something about the tools that you used to get to point B from point A. So without any further ado, let's check that song out. Here we go! I'd advise you to use a synthesizer.